One of my first tattoos actually was a big upside down cross with Amen tattooed underneath it. And in the same era, in shop class in high school, I made a metal upside down cross earring about this big that I had for a couple of weeks before it got torn off in a mosh pit. But that was it's not a lot of dots to connect to go from there to swastikas.
Hey folks, welcome to Unsung Podcast. My name is Mark in an undisclosed location, not with Chris this week. And Chris, you're also you're in the place that we always record.
I'm sitting on the guest side of my room. The audience will not be used to this, but this is where we've got strategic potted plants and a bookshelf to make me look learned.
It helps. It helps.
Thanks.
And you're going to need that in this episode because this week we've got a really special guest with us.
We're going to be speaking with Arno Michaelis. Is that correct?
You nailed it.
I nailed it because honestly, I was listening to somebody doing a bit about you and they called you Michaels, and I'm pretty sure that is not correct.
Yeah, I get that. Michaelis, everybody, every way but how you said it, which is correct. So thank you.
So Arno, we've been teasing this for a few weeks, so if you're a regular with the show, you'll probably know this. But so Arno's a writer, a couple of books to his name. Arno is an activist, an advocate, Parents for Peace, other things. We'll get to you in 2 seconds. But Arno is an interesting figure for us to study because of Arno's past as a member of a neo-Nazi skinhead gang, but also the frontman of what at the time was a really rather successful band called Centurion. And Arno will walk us through how his life has changed since those days and how he got into the work that he does now. Arno, could you, for starters, introduce your 2 books, both of which Mark and myself have read, but that I would very much like the audience to know about and read, and also where they can get them.
I appreciate you guys reading the books, for sure. My first book is called My Life After Hate, which I self-published in 2010. And the second book I have out is called The Gift of Our Wounds, which I co-authored with my dear friend and brother Party Singh Kalika and a brilliant Pulitzer Prize-winning co-author named Robin Gabby Fisher. That's available from St. Martin's Press, so most conventional booksellers would have that one. The first book, My Life After Hate, you can get at my website, which mylifeafterhate.com.
Some of the organizations that you do work for, Arno, what kind of thing do you do day to day?
Well, my day job is I'm a what's known as a peer exit specialist at a group called Parents for Peace. Parents for Peace was founded by a family in Memphis, Tennessee, Afro-American family. Their son had been radicalized into an Islamist group, and he murdered a U.S. service member, and he'll be in prison for the rest of his life. And his father and his sister started Parents for Peace. Their names were Melvin and Monica Bledsoe, as the resource they wished they had when their son and brother Carlos was being radicalized. So Parents for Peace coaches families who have a loved one who's been radicalized into any flavor of violent extremism about how to create an environment that's most conducive to lead that loved one to a better place. We also work directly with the individuals of concern ourselves. And over the past year, we've realized there's a big need for frontline responders, not just law enforcement and like emergency medical tech, but mental health professionals, people who school administrators and teachers. We train those groups on how to recognize and counter extremism when they see it coming across their day-to-day.
I guess we're obviously going to get to this as well, but that's one of the main things, is recognizing it, knowing what you're seeing. And I think, as we mentioned, you were part of a skinhead gang, probably stereotypical in a lot of ways, the way you guys looked, the way you dressed, the way you tattoos, that kind of thing. It's not always as easy as that, especially nowadays. And so I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of helping people recognize what they're dealing with before you can even start dealing with it. So as I said, I wanted to make sure we got that up front because nobody is reducible to one label, but it's unavoidable that you had a very sketchy past. Your youth took you into, well, really like the upper echelons of the far right in some cases, sharing a room with people like David Duke. You've been, Ben Klassen, Church of the Creator founder, like the names that you encounter when you start reading this sort of stuff here about the far right. But that's not specifically why you're here. Now, you were part of a series on the Insider channel on YouTube, and it was a terrific interview, a long-form interview that you did. I would encourage people to check out the books, but also to go and check out the likes of that interview and other work that you've done if they look you up on YouTube, to sort of get the gist of your past. My Life After Hate goes into amazing detail about your journey into the gang, graduating, basically like climbing the ranks. You ended up being one of the founders of Hammerskin Nation, which is, I think, the world's biggest skinhead neo-Nazi group. And so that's all covered in there. We don't want to dwell too much on that because, first of all, I'm sure you're sick to death repeating yourself about it. And secondly, because it's been done so well by these other resources. But there was something that jumped out of the Insider interview that I watched, and it immediately made me get in touch with Mark about it, and then it kind of prompted us to just take a wild stab in the dark and send you this message and say, would you be interested about focusing on music in depth? Because as I mentioned, you were the front man of Centurion, who 20,000 plus record sales, and when you're dealing with white supremacist neo-Nazi bands, that is not to be sniffed at. I mean, what is it, 6,000 sales now to get you in the charts, Mark?
Yeah.
Over here. So, I mean, you were influential in that culture, I'm sure much to your chagrin these days, but you were. You had clout, a lot of people looked up to you. You were the guy on a lot of walls, I'm sure, for a lot of young men and women growing up. And I just think there's so much more we can discuss with you on that particular subject and some of the wee bits that shoot off from that. How does music radicalise? Why, for example, has every, neo-Nazi, white supremacist group of scale started two things as far as I can tell? One of them's a publishing house and the other one is some sort of music label or music distribution. Why is this so important to them? What does it do? You've mentioned in the past how it bypasses logic, builds identity. So I think we'll dig into that in a fair bit of depth, and that's what we're really getting at with this interview. So please, by all means, go and listen. In fact, perhaps even before you go any further, press pause, go and get the basics, go and get the background in Arno. But we're going to use Arno's just his experience, his understanding, his insight to try and unpack the more musical side of things, in keeping with the remit of the podcast. It's not, by the way, that we're nominating Centurion as an unsung classic album that you should have made.
Don't go buy Centurion. I don't know that it's in press anymore, but if it is, it's the money's going to bad actors. So
there's bound to be some bad faith actors out there that will assume that's the gist of the episode. Actually, it's an interesting juncture, maybe just to mention something. So Mark and I, beforehand, we always cut music samples into these shows, and instantly we were like, okay, I'm not comfy with the idea of cutting in Centurion or cutting in Screwdriver or cutting in these bands. However, I'm less comfortable with the idea of discussing them and then people going away and giving them view counts, watches, any sort of listens and things. Doing it through the podcast for 15 seconds at a time, I'm hopeful, satisfies your curiosity. It doesn't give them any revenue. They don't get a stream count on YouTube. They don't get any listens anywhere else.
Right.
So I think we sort of came, unless you have any objections, we came to I think human curiosity is unavoidable. People are going to want to hear what that sounded like as a reference point. So by us putting in these 15-second clips, I feel that hopefully prevents the listeners going away and listening to that stuff elsewhere. Does that sit okay with you?
Yeah, I think that's smart, actually. And you're right. If I was hearing this story and I had no frame of reference, I'd want to hear what they sounded like.
Okay, well, let's do a little bit of our due diligence. Okay, we've talked about your books. Can you just give us like some basics on where you grew up, roughly? The States.
Yeah, I grew up in the United States. I've done a lot of work in Europe, and it pains me because when I'm in Europe and I say I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, people have a blank stare, and then I have to say, "Do you know where Chicago is?" "Oh yeah, everybody knows where Chicago is." "Okay, well we're about 90 miles north of Chicago," and that speaks to a ancient, age-old rivalry between Milwaukee and Chicago. Not just in sports teams, but in, who makes the best food or who has the best parties or whatever. In all honesty, Milwaukee's kind of just a scale model of Chicago. That's very, very similar city, similar segregation, similar culture. But for people who have a hard time referencing geography in the States, we're right by Chicago. It's 90 miles. So, but the way the Chicago traffic is, like for me, I don't go down there unless I got a leisurely day to make the trip because the traffic is hell.
So you were from, is it Mequon? Is that how it's pronounced?
Mequon, yeah. It's a suburb of Milwaukee, about 15 miles north on the shores of Lake Michigan. It's quite nice.
And what took you into Milwaukee itself? Like, did you move there?
Growing up in Mequon, I was bored out of my mind with it. It's very safe. It's very clean. It's very, I wouldn't say sanitized, but it's just for a aspiring antisocial alcoholic. It's pretty snoozy. So I dropped out of high school after my sophomore year, the second year of high school, and I moved into Milwaukee into a house full of punk rockers in a neighborhood called River West, which is kind of between the posh east side that's on the lake and the inner city of Milwaukee that's just a bit west of River West.
Yeah, there's something that comes across in your books that I think is really worth noting here, that contrary to maybe the image a lot of people have, and certainly a lot of the people that did get involved in the skinhead gangs and stuff, you came from not a broke background. You come from like a sort of lower middle class background. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working in the counter-violent extremism space internationally since 2010, so 15 years now. And doing this work, I've met a lot of other formers, as we're known in the space. A former as in a former violent extremist. And I know formers of every stripe. It's kind of my job now to create former white nationalists, so I do my best to create as many of those as I can. I know a lot of other former white nationalists who've been working in this space for a while as well. And I also know a ton of former terrorists in Muslim clothing, as my colleague Mubin Shaikh puts it. He was formerly a self-proclaimed jihadi, had his epiphany when 9/11 happened, and actually went undercover for the Canadian intelligence service and foiled a terror plot that would have rivaled 9/11. And knowing all of these formers, I hear their stories. Mubin and I are dear, dear friends. We've known each other for 13, 14 years. And I hear their stories, and almost in every one of them, you find what mental health circles call adverse childhood experiences. So I don't have any letters after my name, but I hang around with a lot of people who do have letters after their name, and I get some mental health chops from osmosis. And if you look at my childhood, you wouldn't really see a whole lot of adverse childhood experiences. My childhood was pretty idyllic. My parents were together. They loved me very much. They let me know that at every turn. And I really had everything a kid could need. I never went hungry. I never took a beating. In a subjective viewpoint, I was like the poor kid in Mequon, but it should be pointed out that the poor kid in Mequon would be seen as fabulously wealthy by probably a billion children on this planet. So we were living beyond our means a bit, and that financial stress was a big factor in my parents' deteriorating relationship. But for all intent and purposes, I had a pretty great childhood.
It's interesting that, yeah, I think it runs somewhat counterintuitively until you actually start to dig into it. And certainly in subsequent movements, we'll talk a bit about this as we go, certainly the black metal movement, which has had a lot of problems with radicalization in the far right. That was certainly it began as an almost exclusively middle class, in fact, in the case of some of them, very upper middle class movement. So I think it confounds people all the more, but hopefully we get a wee bit more understanding. So you ended up becoming part of Chicago area skinheads at some point. Cash, is that right?
I was never a member of Cash, but it was through Cash that I was exposed to the white power skinhead movement. Cash was, to my knowledge, the first white power crew in the United States. They were heavily influenced by white power skinhead gangs in the UK. And they had formed a distro company called Romantic Violence, where they would import like Screwdriver, Brutal Attack, No Remorse, the type of OG white power skinhead bands, vinyl records typically to the States, and then sell them on their own. And I didn't have the money to buy vinyl records even, because I spent it all on beer. So I was exposed to Screwdriver and probably a bootleg of a bootleg cassette tape that I heard outside of a punk.
Yeah, I mean, you were a punk before you were any sort of like far right skinhead. So what was what were some of your musical influences prior to that? They were quite different, as I understand it.
One of the most formulative musical memories I have in my life was, and this is years earlier, I was in 6th grade, and I had a buddy whose older brother was like into skateboarding and punk and whatnot. And I remember sitting in this guy's room and dropping the needle on Fear, the record. And he's like, I don't care about you! Fuck you! And I'm just like, oh, yo, yes! Like, that was... I'll never forget that moment. Just hearing somebody scream fuck on a record, like that alone just like hooked me. And so I was really into my early punk influences were definitely Fear, Dead Kennedys. In Mequon, there was like a big kind of skater kid culture, and I've always been really uncoordinated. I couldn't skateboard to save my life, but I would like sit at the half pipe drinking beer, listening to punk with all the skater kids while they were actually skateboarding.
I wonder how many sort of neo-Nazi skins spent time with the Dead Kennedys in their early days. I wonder what Jello would make of that. Yeah, and before that, you were into like breakdancing and hip hop and stuff as well. It's like quite a diverse background, wasn't it?
I was. For me, it's always been. I think I have like kind of a gene for being an iconoclast. Like whatever everyone else is doing, I don't want to do it. And I actually started getting into hip hop years before it was like cool for suburban white kids to do that. So in the kind of mid 80s, early 80s, I was listening to Run DMC and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. I saw both of them live. I saw New Edition live. There was a roller rink kind of on the outskirts of the ghetto that was really just a couple miles from my house. And every Saturday I had a Afro-American friend in school, and his older sister would go to Starlight roller rink every Saturday, and he would prevail on his parents to get her to take us with her. And it was me and him, and then a couple other kids, and a couple other kids. And so I used to be at this roller rink every Saturday night in breakdance battles, and listening to like Jam On It and all these other skate jams, and really just loving every minute of it. But it was when that started getting popular that I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm not doing this anymore. And that's when I kind of like really got into punk after kind of dipping my toes in it in 6th grade.
Yeah, see, as you got into the racist side of the punk rock movement, and were there bands that you abandoned? Like, how was that policed in the scene? Because I'm assuming you guys sat around and stuck records on, but were there people that were just on the blacklist? Pardon the pun.
Well, I always say like punk is a big tent. And over the years, like there's been every kind of like sub counterculture faction within the punk scene. in my punk days, to me, punk was just about breaking shit and pissing people off. Like I was kind of Sid Vicious kind of punk. I was gonna do things that shocked people and scared people and smash things and just get like royally fucked up at every turn on whatever substance I could get a hold of. Like that was my idea of punk. But even back in the mid '80s, there was we called them peace punks back then. And these were kind of a precursor to anti-fascists or what have you, and they were very left-oriented politically, and they had there's a Maximum Rock and Roll fanzine that I would read a lot, and when I was a punk promoter, I actually used that to network. But in Maximum Rock and Roll, they're like, don't drink Coors beer, Coors doesn't hire black people. And like, I didn't really give a rat's ass who Coors did or did not hire, but I didn't like the peace punks at all. Like, to me, punk was not about caring about things and boycotting. It was just about smashing things. So I would sit outside a punk show and actually spend, like, Coors was fancy beer to me. I was usually buying like the quantity, not quality stuff for a couple bucks cheaper than Coors, but I would spend the extra couple dollars just to get Coors, to drink it in front of the peace punks, and I had my Coors hat on, and it was really the peace punks who were like, you can't listen to this band and you can't listen to that band. And I remember they didn't like Slapshot, and that was my introduction to Slapshot. I'm like, oh, they don't like Slapshot, I'm gonna give them a listen. Slapshot's fucking awesome. Even, yeah, never mind their straight edge, and they probably like get in a fight with me because I'm drunk constantly, but I like their sound, I like the band, and they're violent, so cool, sign me up. And that's, I think during that period, there was kind of a transition happening where if I look at my Skinhead history, the beginning of it was seeing the movie TR, the Rejected. Are you guys familiar with that? Suburbia.
No, I'm not, man. No.
Suburbia. The movie
Suburbia.
Was called Suburbia.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
TR was like the punk gang in Suburbia. It wasn't called, So there was a skinhead character in Suburbia who went around beating people up and drinking, and he was hanging out with all the punk rockers, and I was like, that's me. I'm that guy. So I started shaving my head. I started wearing a flight jacket and boots. And I wasn't necessarily like white power by any stretch at that point, but I did start getting into bands like Agnostic Front and the Cro-Mags, which again were not by any stretch racist. But I think at times both of those bands, or at least some of their followers, would be a little like nationalist. And I think they were doing that in the same spirit that I was drinking my Coors beer. To be like, oh, fuck you, peace punks. Here, I have an American flag on my flight jacket. That really bothers you, doesn't it? And again, like, I didn't really give a shit about America. I just knew that the American flag was offensive to peace punks. So that was what would attract me to it. And so I did start branching out more and more, like, away from the old school core punk bands. And a really formative time also was one year at summer camp, I met some headbanger kid who lived in Milwaukee, and he turned me on to Slayer and Exodus, and I turned him on to the Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front, and it was a match made in heaven. We were both like, oh, this is awesome. Hell yeah. And for me, like, the icing on the cake was, especially with Slayer, like the satanic imagery. And again, I didn't really give a shit about Satan whatsoever. I wasn't like into Satan, but I didn't like Christians because I saw Christians as a status quo. Therefore, running around with a Slayer shirt with a pentagram on it was like, haha, awesome. Look at how pissed off the Christians are. Look how afraid they are. One of my first tattoos actually was a big upside down cross with amen tattooed underneath it. And in the same era, in shop class in high school, I made a metal upside down cross earring about this big that I had for a couple of weeks before it got torn off in a mosh pit. But that was it's not a lot of dots to connect to go from there to swastikas, and it was for the same rationale.
Hey folks, it's Mark here, coming to you a few days after we recorded the interview with Arno. As you can see, I'm deep in the edit of these videos, which means the next one's coming really soon. So please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you can find out when that drops. Now, continue your YouTube journey with Unsung by clicking on this video or podcast right here.